the left, especially in modern America, has targeted children's literature as a mechanism for indoctrinating kids to their worldview. I became aware of a lot of children's books that are written by quote unquote Christian authors, but books that are gay affirming, books that really just even more kind of in a general standpoint have to do with self-affirmation. And obviously I'm not going to rail against self-affirmation, but I think there's so much more to tell kids than just merely to love yourself constantly. In the therapeutic age that we live in, this is almost always what you can expect.
Back to the first thing you said about the left really targeting children. You know, they understand, hats off to them for understanding the power of stories, of picture books. You know, get them while they're young. Kids come into this world hungry for story. That's the way that God made us. And hungry for story and a heart full of foolishness. They don't know right from wrong necessarily. They don't know up from down. They don't know what they should love, what they should hate. And so the way that those affections are catechized are through story.
Welcome to Indie Thinker with Reed Huberman. You're about to make the jump from the dishonest mainstream media into free and independent thought from key thought leaders on the subjects of culture, causes, politics, and faith.
Welcome to the Indie Thinker Guest Show. My guest today is Forrest Dickison, and I'm really happy to have him on just in time for Christmas because he's got a great new book that we're going to be talking about today. So I want to jump into a little bit of his background, tell you why I think this book is so important for the culture right now, but also talk about why it's important for Christians to be making things just regardless. So Forrest, thanks so much for being on the show today.
Yeah, Reed, thanks for having me.
Sure thing, man. I was able to be with Doug about a year ago now and filmed him just briefly with something that I'm doing for a documentary that I'm doing on fatherlessness. So I'm really excited about producing that and releasing this in the coming year. But you guys are up to some really, really amazing stuff at Canon. Before I jump into Canon more broadly, let's just focus on you a little bit. Can you give us just kind of a brief bio?
Sure, yeah. I was born in Moscow, Idaho. So I grew up going to Christ Church. I did Logos K through 12, and then went to the University of Idaho, got my Bachelor of Fine Arts degree. And then from there, I started working with Canon Press. So it was pretty early on that I was working with them. And I was doing everything from biology textbooks to the Hello Ninja board book, curriculum of all, book covers, all kinds of stuff. So I've been an illustrator for the past about 10 years. I'm married and have 4 kids, 3 girls and a boy. They're all fantastic. And this book that you mentioned is my first foray into writing as well as illustrating. So I've illustrated a handful of things. And this is my first attempt at the words as well as the pictures.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit about that, just because I'm curious about the creative process. So what was it like doing this for the first time? So you're an artist by trade and all of that, but it's a totally different world, I assume, to write this kind of thing. So is this your first time writing a kid's book or just writing a book at all, period?
Yes, to both. So
okay.
I've written projects that weren't any good before.
You too.
So, I've written sentences before. I've written emails, things like that. This is obviously the first thing that made it into book form that I thought was good enough. The publisher thought it was good enough actually put it into book, print it, ship it. But there's a lot of overlap I found between picture making and word craft. In the end, you're just trying to deliver a narrative experience to your audience, and so I'm used to that, doing that by means of pictures. Words are just pictures, but buried further back in the imagination. So with an image, you're given a little bit more, but it's not as specific. With words, I think you get really specific, and the audience's imagination is a little more active. So, but there's a lot of overlap. So I think for this book, I started with an image, and then jumped into words to kind of play with that image. And then when the words ran dry, I jumped back to the images. And so I was kind of bouncing between the two to try and progress the narrative in a way that was simple, clean, fun, and kept me entertained.
Yeah. Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about the book itself, and then we'll get granular, and then I guess pull out a little bit, just because I'm more interested in the more kind of broader, maybe philosophical topics that are involved with writing a children's book. And I know that sounds silly, but I'll explain later. But I am interested in the actual story itself. So. Where did the inspiration for Crispin's Rainy Day come from? Maybe even like the name. Does it have anything to do with St. Crispin?
No, Crispin was a name that I attached to it early on. It just felt like a classic picture book name. There's Crispin's Crispian from a book, Mr. Dog, I think is what it's called. It was, the boy was Crispin just because, and then nothing better ever arrived in my imagination, so it stuck. Yeah. And then the story itself, I mean, there were all kinds of different influences, but there's a lot of Narnia in there. There's some Miyazaki in there. There's actually, those are probably the two biggest pools of inspiration that I drew from.
Yeah, I was hoping you weren't going to say Quentin Tarantino.
No, he didn't. I don't think he made it in.
Okay.
Yeah. So Lewis and Miyazaki, I was kind of a mashup of those two things. So the worldview of Lewis, the visual style, and some of the tastes of Miyazaki, I tried to combine that into 32 pages, and then put it in meter, just for the heck of it, I think.
Yeah. All right, so let's draw back now a little bit and talk about the importance of these kind of things for the culture. There's two things that come to mind when I think about children's books these days, and the first thing that comes to mind, I think, is just the way in which the left, especially in modern America, has targeted children's literature as a mechanism for indoctrinating kids to their worldview. And I became really attuned to this when I started podcasting, not only in terms of the left-wing influence, but how the left-wing influence has also flooded the church. So I became aware of a lot of children's books that are written by quote-unquote Christian authors, but books that are gay-affirming, books that really just even more kind of in a general standpoint have to do with self-affirmation. And obviously, I'm not going to rail against self-affirmation, but I think there's so much more to tell kids than just merely to love yourself constantly. In the therapeutic age that we live in, this is almost always what you can expect from kids' books, even if they're not nefarious, like the first thing I mentioned. The latter are always very sterile. And this is one of the things that already I appreciate about your book, just from a superficial glance, is that you're doing more than just telling the story of how kids should love themselves. I think this is a great book, and I read it to my kids when I was a young dad. I Am Jesus' Sunbeam or something like that. I forget what it's called, but there's so much better things that we could be telling kids other than to love yourself, which they're gonna get in the culture constantly, because that's basically the only message they ever hear. There's nothing that you will ever do that isn't great. So talk to me about kind of some of the themes and the ideas that you wanted to put in this book, specifically to promote the ideas that make not only this country great, that fueled this nation, but also that embody the truth of Christian Scripture.
Yeah. So, you might not rail against self-affirming books, but I will. I can't stand those kinds of stories because back to the first thing you said about the left really targeting children. They understand, hats off to them for understanding the power of stories, of picture books. Get them while they're young. Kids come into this world hungry for story. That's the way that God made us. And hungry for story and a heart full of foolishness. They don't they don't know right from wrong necessarily. They don't know up from down. They don't know what they should love, what they should hate. And so the way that those affections are catechized are through story. And so obviously, so when the left does this, or when Christians who ought not to be doing it poorly do it this way, what you get is stories that teach your kids to love and hate the wrong things. And then you also get stories that are just bad stories. They're just propaganda. They're not fulfilling narratives that are just fun. So stories ought to be fun. Otherwise, they're not loving your audience.
Right.
And then they ought to be challenging. Otherwise, you're not loving your audience. So the thing that I hate so very much about self-affirming stories is that they are treating the child as though they're not, well, human. So to be human in this world is to grow. It's, you know, if you're going to, the thing that we ought to be feeding to our children is that you must be growing up into Christ, into a human being. If you're constantly telling them that you're just fine the way that they are, that's actually a form of hating them, because to tell something that is meant to grow, to stop growing, you're just fine, is not love. That's absurd. Self-satisfied people are boring, uninteresting people, and those stories that tell them to love themselves are just, I can't stand those things, because but it's not enough to just sit here and rail about it. So I thought, okay, I have to do something about this. I've been, contributing to good stories, I hope, with my pictures for a while. So, but I thought I have enough of a handle on, the narrative art form to try and write my own thing. So what I wanted to do with Crispin was I wanted a story that felt classic, old, that was just a good, healthy snack for kids. So it needed to, on its face, it needed to be fun, just a classic fun adventure. But I also wanted to make sure that it was catechizing the audience's emotions in the right direction. So, because it's kids' imaginations that's the future. That's the next generation. What will they love? What will they hate? And every story that they grow up reading is going to form those affections and loyalties, so that when they're adults, and I'm sure you've experienced this, when they see the wrong kind of character in their own lives, their first reaction is a gut reaction in the right direction that they can maybe articulate later. But that gut reaction is a healthy, good thing, as long as it's been fed by the right stories.
Yeah. I want to say something about this too, because what comes to mind is that even this almost counterintuitive notion that you see in C.S. Lewis, which I really don't think that I had taken much time to think about until this conversation, is that C.S. Lewis goes to the trouble of making one of the heroes of the story the bad guy at the very beginning in The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, which is such a great message, because to merely tell kids all the time that they're always the good guy and everybody else is the bad guy doesn't actually create self-improvement, but it also is a lie, first and foremost. So those kind of stories are lies, and they are harmful. But I think Christians have this better perspective on these kind of things because we understand human nature. So all that to say is that the radical nature of telling a story differently can, even if it's a kid's story, can fundamentally shift culture, can shift identity, and shift the way people think about the world around them. So I think that's a beautiful analogy. It's interesting to hear you say C.S. Lewis is kind of a muse in all of this in the way that you're writing this story. So finish the thought if you had more that you want to say about that. But I have a question for you about specific themes that you put in the book as well.
I think that's about the gist of it. I mean, it's not to say that one picture book is going to shatter anyone's world and bring them on their knees in repentance to Christ. It could do that, but it's another little healthy meal that hopefully is pointing them in the right direction. It's nothing, this is why it requires more and more artists, Christian artists to be putting good stuff out into the culture, because it's needed. There's a lot of imaginations out there that are being starved by stories that are at best boring and at worst nefarious and toxic.
Right. So using C.S. Lewis again, one of my favorite stories in Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe is when, or I guess vignettes of the story, is when Lucy, I think, is speaking to Mr. Beaver, and they're talking about Aslan, finally appearing and seeing Aslan. And I won't bore you with the anecdote. Suffice to say, she wants to go visit Aslan, and then in that encounter realizes he's a lion, and she's like, whoa, okay, this is not safe to go visit a lion. How are we going to do that? And then he says something to the effect of, oh, he's not safe. You can rest assured about that, but he is good. So right there is just this powerful image of God, the nature of God, and the dichotomy between a loving God but a forceful God. And this is all in a children's book. So I'd like to talk with you about some of the themes that you feel like are important in Crispin's Rainy Day. So what are some of the, like, maybe even the vignettes or the stories or the things that you feel like that are important for kids to learn that you have in the book?
Yeah. So, this, at its core, this is a story about a relationship between a brother and a sister. And they jump into a world of pirate frogs and have adventures and hunt for a lightning blade. But it's really just the change happens in the main character, who is too busy, doesn't want to include his sister, and then has to learn that this is not the way. He's being a bad big brother to his little sister. That was a challenge to make that clear without sort of putting it on the nose or making it too preachy. But it needed to come naturally in the story. But the main character is a bit of an Edmund. He's he doesn't betray his sister, but he is uninterested in including her and thinks she's just a nuisance. Mm-hmm. And so he had to, and so he kind of comes to the end of himself. But when he has a slice of her cake. So which I think some people have told me that felt a little like you were cheating. Like, he should have realized that he was being a bad big brother all on his own. Mm-hmm. and gone and made things right with his sister. But I don't think that that's actually how it works. Humans, especially men, they're very simple creatures, and things like a well-cooked meal has a tremendous amount of freight to it when it comes to our self-awareness, affections, loyalties. So when he eats his sister's cake is when he realizes, wow, this cake is really good. I've actually been a bad person. So, that's where the turn happens. And then, there's this refrain of the little sister being locked up and left behind. So at the beginning, she's locked up in the cabin. Then she's taken by a dragon, locked up in the dragon's tower. And so the parallel there is that Crispin is being a dragon himself by being a bad older brother. And so his job is to kill the dragon and save his sister. But the first dragon that must be put to death is, to sound esoteric, is the dragon within. So kids are human beings. We're all fallen creatures. More often than not, we are the villains in our own stories, not full grown villains, but we are cultivating little villain weeds in our hearts. Those are the ones that need to be pulled first before you can go and kill the actual dragon that's out there. So, that's what I wanted to do with this book. And then I also wanted to make sure that Crispin, he's a young man. I didn't want him to come across as obnoxious or like he's just this, like his masculinity is something that needs to be repressed and it's just all bad. So I wanted boys to read this and be excited about jumping off the couch with a lightning blade, chopping dragons' heads off, saving their sisters, to be excited about that. And then with Rose, I wanted her to represent just classic feminine strength. So she at the beginning of the book, she cheerfully states what it is she wants, and then throughout the story, by just being herself, by being cheerful, non-reactive, she eventually gets exactly what she wants, which is a picnic in a fort with her brother. And she does it in a way that isn't brassy, obnoxious, feministy, Wonder Woman in miniature. She's just faithful in one direction without reacting to the men around her. And in doing that, she becomes the center of gravity for the whole pirate crew, which I think is a trait that I mentioned Miyazaki earlier. Lewis gets this as well, but Miyazaki does this quite well with his female characters. They're strong. I won't say independent because that's ridiculous, but they're strong and spirited in such a way that isn't obnoxious and feministy and loud. Like they're not trying to compete with the boys. But they are. They just know who they are. They're not reacting to the boys in a way that's insecure and shrill. But they are incredibly compelling, self-controlled, hospitable, hardworking, intelligent. And that's what I was trying to do with the character of Rose. I wanted boys to read this and be excited to grow up to be a man. I wanted girls to read this and be excited to grow up to be, a true woman with strength that can handle obnoxious men without reacting to them.
Yeah, men are obnoxious mostly, and food is the way to their heart, among other things. But you can't put that other thing in a children's book. So this is really interesting because I don't want to overinflate your ego here, but I come from a standpoint of I believe we live in a leftist saturated culture that really is not. We're getting close to this, and I hopefully am providing some aspect of this. But I feel like we are a very starved culture in terms of the kind of stories that kids should be told and that adults should be told. There's certainly lots of great TV shows coming out more and more all the time, but in terms of, and I almost hate to call it this, but in terms of just Christian art, in terms of meaningful stories, in terms of stories that are in praise of real virtue, I feel like we're living in a wasteland as far as that's concerned. Some of that comes from some things that I think you just kind of glanced over that I think are important to just touch on. And one of those is that it's interesting to me that whenever Christians step to the fore to write stories like the ones that you've written, we're often told that you're not supposed to indoctrinate children. I think that's hilarious, right? Because they have no problem indoctrinating children. And the reality is that part of teaching, especially children, is not just giving them information, but actually telling them what to think. But the real difference here is that when leftists tell people what to think, they are typically lying to people, whereas the Christian virtues that I think are on display in the book, as you just explained them, are us telling people what to think about gender roles and what to think about all these other things. Yeah, we're telling them what to think, but we're actually telling them a true story, which makes it very worthy of praise. So I think in terms of like the market out there, maybe I'm wrong about this, but I just come from a standpoint of feeling that there's so little of that out there, and whatever we can do to shine lights like this book does, I think are so powerful.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think every now and then there's something that's made that sticks out. But it's pretty rare. The good news for Christian artists is that the bar has never been lower. And you can write a story that just is, the book I wrote is not anything special. It's just a basic story. But because what I tried to do was take a character from A to B without being preachy and, dogmatic about the whole thing, I think hopefully it will stand out because most stories these days aren't actually stories. They're just characters who go on a journey to discover that they don't need to change at all, which is the opposite of what a story actually is. It's by definition a character that changes in some way. So it is a wasteland out there, and good news is the bar has never been lower. Bad news is that people are just scrapping for anything they can get, and if it's terrible, it's as long as it looks like a story, smells like a story, they'll be ingesting it. So but this is a good time to go back to old stuff too. So I tried to make this book. I tried to write this book with a long timeline in mind. I want this book to still be good 500 years from now. That was the goal. And I think I know it's easy for artists to look at the current state of things, the trends every day, which are blowing this way, that way, and to try and chase those trends, which sometimes can lead to financial success, I think, but also you're going to end up making a story that will fizzle out with the rest of the trends. And so, and all these bad books that the left are putting out are going to be gone in a few years, which is great because they're just so bad. They have no staying power. So it's important to just sit back, take the long view, look 500 years into the future, 1,000 years into the past. What are those things that, if we're reading something today that's hundreds of years old, odds are pretty good that there's something in there that is timeless, human, and true. And if it's true, it's going to stick around.
Yeah, 100%. This is kind of a weird segue, but one of the things that makes me excited about this, especially kind of kids' books, kids' literature being written from the perspective that you guys are doing over at Canon, is that I don't think there's an exception to this. Maybe if you had an abusive childhood or something, I don't know. But I think everybody remembers a movie or a book or something that they read when they were kids or saw when they were kids that touched their life. So the thing that comes to mind for me is one of my favorite movies as a kid was The Never-Ending Story. And there's some when you go back and watch that as an adult, I'm not saying that you appreciate everything, but you see things in it that were very deep truths about faith, about belief, about the importance of literacy and not letting those things die. There's a very conservative story in the backdrop of The Never-Ending Story. And I didn't realize it all as a kid, but there's something that spoke to me on a deeper level than just some of those more heady topics, and it stuck with me even as an adult. So I think that I don't think we should underestimate the power of just a simple child's book and children's book. However, I also say that part of the reason that it stuck around with me is that it was also on the big screen, and it had fantastical elements like you've explained in your book. So I want to segue and talk about kind of like the future of not only this book but other things you guys are going to be doing in terms of animation. So you guys are presently working on animation with Canon, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And what does the future look like? And I know there's probably some things that you can't tell me in terms of detail, but what does the future look like for Canon and kids content, family content?
Yeah. Well, our goal is to be putting out original shows and features for kids within the next couple of years. It's a show it's a big lift. There's a lot of moving parts and a lot of money that has to be tossed around. But we're doing our best. We have a pretty big library of ideas that have been developed to some extent that we are working on getting greenlit and funded and made, and then hopefully dropping those into the Canon Plus streaming platform. But my goal, and then the goal of the guys here at Canon for a long time, has been just healthy classic stories without the modern cynicism and the insecurities that a lot of kids' movies have these days, and just blasting those out to as many imaginations as possible. And we don't talk about it too much because I'd rather just do it. There's there's easy to say that Hollywood stinks and we ought to be doing something else, but that's obvious, especially now. The Overton window has shifted quite a bit. It's obvious to every Christian parent, well, most out there, that we ought not to be feeding our kids terrible stories, which is most things these days. But our goal is to not talk about it and just go and do it. And the thing about doing it is that it sometimes takes longer than you would like. So, but we're working on it.
All right. So what does that slate look like? I mean, is there any ideas of whether or not you guys will turn Crispin into something that is animated, or is there any other projects that are coming up that you might be able to kind of tease?
Yeah. So, well, let's see. We have the one we're currently working on right now. Well, there's a handful, but the one that's kind of front burner is Blah Blah Black Sheep, which was a picture book that Nate Wilson wrote years ago to kind of tag along with Hello Ninja, the first board book. Hello Ninja got picked up for a Netflix show. Blah Blah kind of faded into the background, but we recently revamped Blah Blah and released it 2 years ago now. But we've kind of retooled the we've taken that simple book and expanded it into like a mini series. So that's what we're working on right now. And then we have some features, I think. And yeah, Crispin is definitely not off the table. I definitely had show potential in mind when I was writing this. I thought if this is, a piece of IP, I want to make sure that it's something that could potentially be a show, a feature in the future. So right now, no, there are no plans, but there might be.
Okay. So I wanted to sidetrack real quick and talk about Hello Ninja, because I forgot to mention that up at the front, but it's also really cool, interesting that you guys got picked up by Netflix. So I'm kind of curious about how that story took shape, how you connected with the author, but then also how you guys got that greenlit with Netflix.
Yeah, so Nate and I started working together back when I was still in college. I did some illustrations for his uncle's biology textbook that he saw, and then tossed me some projects for his Ashtown Burials series. They were working on some pitches for studios. They needed some quick production art, so I did that as well. And then from there, we kind of segued into the Hello Ninja board book. I can't remember why he wrote it. He just wanted to. But I was there. I picked up the illustrations, ran with it, and then it had this funny journey from Moscow, Idaho, down to a bidding war between large studios in LA. I think it first was going to be. It ended up as a Starbucks pick of the week because I think Nate had a title that was going to be a Starbucks pick of the week that ended up not working out. So Hello Ninja was kind of the pinch hitter for that. That Starbucks pick of the week thing went well. I think partly because usually the Starbucks pick of the week, I don't even know if this is a thing anymore, but it used to be a song, Taylor Swift's latest single, whatever.
How does that work, by the way? I'm not familiar with that.
The Starbucks thing?
Yeah.
I don't know. I have no idea.
Okay.
I don't. It was an ebook is the way that it worked, I guess. So it was like songs. I don't really know what the pick of the week was until Hello Ninja was one, but I think it stood out because it was a picture book where normally you would get some music, things like that. So I think it was a Kindle download, something like that. So it was there, and then from there went over into Target, did well at Target. And then Nate's agent in LA decided that it needed to be a show, and so she picked it up and shopped it all around to a bunch of different studios. I think it ended up in a bidding war between Amazon, if I remember correctly, and Netflix. Netflix won out. And then, I think in 2018 is when we started production. So Netflix hired a studio up in Canada called Atomic Cartoons, and they knocked it out of the park. So I was involved as kind of a consultant and a designer. I helped out with character design, set designs, things like that. But the studio up in Canada made the whole thing. And then, yeah, we did 4 seasons. It came out, and it ended up being one of the most binged shows on the platform across all uh, genres. So I think
That's insane.
we beat The Mandalorian when that was first out. um,
People really like ninjas, apparently.
I don't know. I think back to what I said earlier about the bar never being low. Have never, as the bar is low. I think Ninja was just it was a non-cynical, earnest Saturday morning cartoon. We weren't trying to indoctrinate any of your kids. We wanted this to be fun. That was it. And we wanted kids to leave to watch the show and then go out into their backyards and have more fun than they would have otherwise. So it was always, that was our goal, was just make kids excited to be here. And because it was a simple approach, I think it really connected with a lot of kids. And so, yeah, that was let's see, 6 years ago or so. So, yeah, it went really well. Atomic Cartoons did a great job. And then right after that, Hollywood imploded. There was Me Too. There was all kinds of, then there was COVID. And so we had other projects lined up that just melted down along with the rest of the system. So what we're currently trying to do is rebuild on our own, but up here at Canon in Moscow, where we're not as dependent on the Hollywood system.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about Canon too, and about the viability of kind of platforms outside of the mainstream. Because I'm kind of in that same boat with filmmaking and with the production of kind of existing content, classic literature, and turning them into things that are consumable for people today. So that's what I do here at Indie Thinker, among other things. You can get your membership today. But one of the things that I'm curious about is, especially in the next 4 years, I believe that we're going to have a really compatible kind of nation, policies, different things that are working in our favor, especially for independent artists and independent media to really kind of take off. So I'm curious about Canon Plus and what you feel like the future looks like for them, not just with animation, but just kind of on a general perspective. So does Canon look like kind of a Netflix that's telling more redemptive stories? What does the future look like for Canon?
Yeah, it's that would be one comparable, but it's just a streaming platform that it's not just shows and movies. It's also books, interviews, things like this. That might be it, actually, and eventually maybe Kindle as well. I don't know if that's in the plans. I can't speak for Canon Plus in that, but we just want our own platform that's sturdy, well made, and onto which we can drop any content that we need to. So whether it's stories, digital books, films, shows, and have it uncancelable, and have full creative control of the kinds of things that we either license and fund or just create ourselves. So Canon Plus there's shows on there that we've just licensed. There's a little Miyazaki. There's some documentaries from third-party creators. So the goal is everything, and so it's an ambitious goal, but I think we have the right team and mindset here to make it happen slowly. So. Mm-hmm.
And what's your success been like? Do you guys know how many subscribers you have, or how the platform has been doing? And how long has Canon Plus been around?
2 to 3 years. Not a whole lot, not very long, but
right.
It's doing great. I don't know how many subscribers there are, but there's a healthy amount. People seem to love it. It's so far it's working out. And it's interesting to see back-end analytics of what hits, what doesn't, what stories people connect with, what stories they don't. And then it's a really helpful tool for artists to be able to see where you've missed. And so maybe how you could, the audience reaction isn't necessarily everything, but it does tell you that you've obviously if it's not connecting with your audience, you failed at some level. So that is nice to be able to have kind of these really fancy graphs to show you what's working, what's not, and maybe then you can draw conclusions about why it is that was the case. So yeah, it's it's a digital monster that I don't understand even a little bit, but it's a very exciting tool to have.
Well, it's got a promising future. Maybe one last question on a personal level. I can imagine, and maybe I'm wrong, but because I'm not necessarily an artist, but I can imagine being an artist and really wondering how things are going to work out. What am I going to do? How's this dream going to become a reality? And then you find yourself working with one of the biggest companies in the world with a show that's been greenlit that you illustrated. And then you find yourself now on an independent platform that's got all the promise in the world, producing all this original content and doing things that probably you only dreamt were possible. So what has the journey been like for you on an individual basis as an artist? Because, we got the stereotypical story of your dad telling you to go get a real job instead of becoming an artist. So I'm sure there's some truth to that in terms of it's just like, okay, so I got an art degree at school, but so now what? So what's the ride been like for you in terms of just where you feel like God's led you on the journey?
Yeah, it's a big question, but I would start with saying that my parents were always supportive. They never, for 1 second, looked at me like, sideways. What are you doing? Why are you trying to be an artist? They were always just I was just the kid that never stopped drawing throughout elementary, high school. Everybody starts drawing, and then there's a handful of people that continue that craft into their later years. And my parents were always supportive. So, and then I graduated from high school and just thought, I don't really want to do anything else. I know I love drawing. I'll just chase that. And then sophomore year of college, at some point, I had that panic moment where I thought, oh no, I actually have to be good enough to make money to do this as a living. And I knew there were opportunities out there. You see drawings and paintings, images all day, every day. So somebody has to be making them. Somebody has to be paid to make them. So I kind of just forgot about the future and just focused on what I could control, which was my own craft competence. So I just hunkered down and just focused on my ability to draw. And I knew that if an opportunity came, then I didn't want to be unprepared for it. So I sat down and I drew and I prepared as best I could. And then the opportunities started to come. And because thankfully, because I was prepared, they worked out for the most part. So yeah, today being an artist is, one, it's never been easier to make money, but it's also never been easier to burn out and just quit, because the nature of social media is that it's this constantly attention grabbing machine that you're just trying to feed to stay relevant. But I think there's also something to be said for the artist that you got to just sit back, take your time, focus on your craft, and if it's good, the cream rises. If it's good, it will get seen. The opportunities will come, and don't worry about the future. You have zero control about who sees it, which agents pick it up, where it goes. So if you just focus on making the best product that you can make with what you've been given, then the rest is up to God. So, yeah.
Well, that's great, man. I think there's a scripture verse about that, perhaps.
Probably.
Take no thought for your life. You can't add a single day by worrying about it. So just seek first the kingdom. No, that's great, man. I appreciate that. And I'm really, really excited to see more creators in the marketplace of ideas and expressing their craft. I've always felt like Christianity stands apart and is self-identifying as superior and worthwhile and meaningful if it's allowed to compete in the marketplace of ideas. But the secular age in which we live has actually not been a free market of ideas. It's been a ideological quarantined marketplace. So I think a free marketplace of ideas, Christianity stands apart head and shoulders above the rest. And so when independent media starts to crop up all over the place, I rejoice, because I think that that's all we needed to actually remove those gatekeepers and actually let the truth shine through the things that we're creating. Now, that's not an excuse for creating total crap, but if we can create excellent content, the meaning and the narratives that the world needs so desperately are found in the Christian faith. So I'm excited that you guys are capitalizing on this moment in time, stepping out into independent media and doing what you're doing. So in order for people to take advantage of it, what is the best way to do this? So I'm sure you guys are doing physical copies that people can purchase, and then they can also do Canon Plus. So give us a couple of different options for how we can access your work.
Yeah, so definitely Canon Plus is, go sign up at canonplus.com. The book is available on Amazon or Canon Press's website. The animated picture book, so it's not fully animated, but it's, the animated picture book will be on Canon Plus, hopefully within the next couple of weeks. So be on the lookout for that. You can find me on Instagram, Twitter. That's about it. I think Facebook. I do have a Facebook, but
it's what your wife told you anyway. How do we purchase physical copies?
Yeah, physical copies you can get directly from canonpress.com or Amazon. Either one is great.
Fantastic. Yeah. All right, great. Well, guys, you definitely need to check that out. There's also, I want to mention this too, there's also a documentary about the making of the book as well on Canon Plus too, right?
Yes. You got to sign up for a membership to get that. But if you want to see the behind the scenes making of this picture book, then head over there and do that.
And there's a trailer for that as well, which gives you kind of some shots into the book and stuff, and gives some of the things that are illustrated in the book. And when you see that, I think you'll be sold on making sure that that's part of the Christmas repertoire, because there's some great stuff there. Very, very creative, and I'm thankful for all the work and the effort that you put into the book to make it available to people. So I'll put that down below in the description of this podcast so people can access that. And want to thank so much for coming on, Forrest, and I hope you'll come on again and let us know kind of some things that are taking place on the platform in the future.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
God bless, man. Thanks so much for being on, and thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and go with God.
Our thanks again to our guests for being on the show today. Indie Thinker with Reed Huberman was brought to you by our sponsors. If you like what you heard today, please do us a big favor and give it a 5-star review and like it and share it with friends. And if you want to hear more awesome guests, make sure to check out past episodes. Indie Thinker is a nonprofit paid for by our sponsors and the generous gifts of people like you. In order to hear more great guests like you did today, please consider giving a tax-deductible gift by going to indiethinker.org. And just remember, your voice matters, but infinitely more when you think for yourself.